Thanks, Jeremy, and everybody here at Creative Mornings. I was learning so much just listening to that introduction, and it's really exciting to be here and to understand the greater context of my place this morning. And thank you, Sophia, and everybody at Creative Mornings. So I just want to start with a transition from the introduction about how I believe everybody is creative. And I truly believe that to my core, that a lot of times as children, we are natural artists and creative people, and through different societal programming, we will like lose touch with that, And I think the greatest gift you can give yourself is to reconnect with that really powerful, potent part of you. And a lot of us are reconnecting with that. And so, yeah, I encourage that. I encourage my students to do that. And so I'll just start with a little introduction. Let's see here. Okay. I came here to Cincinnati in the 80s with my family, who were immigrants from Mexico. I was born in Chicago, where they met, and we came here to Cincinnati, as I mentioned, in the 80s. And so we were like this very close-knit Mexican traditional household in the context of Cincinnati, which was really kind of an interesting dichotomy for me. Let's see, this is me back in Chicago doing a birthday ritual of piñata. This will come and play later with my work, but a piñata at birthdays is very common. People use it now, but it really has origins that, yes, have European traditions, but also pre-Columbian and Mesoamerican traditions in rites of passages, and using sort of destruction as a way to move into a new iteration of yourself. And so we connected with immigrant communities here in different neighborhoods, like Carthage currently is a very big hub for immigrants from Central America and from Mexico. And I grew up Catholic. So in these communities, we would, there was one in Mount St. Joseph. That's where the hub was over the years. And also in Price Hill, we would gather and go to church, but then we would also do these rituals. During this particular one that you're seeing here is an example of alfombras, which are rituals you see specifically done during Semana Santa, which is the week right before Easter. And so as you can see, there's really long ones here, and this one's in Guatemala, and they're all over Mexico. And so we would make religious iconography, Christian, Catholic iconography, and build these floor paintings as a community in and around our churches, here in the Midwest, with the immigrant community. And I really was captured by that as a child. Also making paper flowers, Mexican flowers, with my mother, and piñatas. We'd hand make those growing up. And so, these childhood memories really burned in my brain, I think, in terms of deeply imprinting my aesthetic early on, especially because, I'd come to, my parents did the thing of putting us into great school systems by buying like the most humble house in like a very affluent area, so we get the best schools. But it was really kind of a sharp contrast to what I was experiencing at home, and then that larger world around me. in my school community at Sycamore Sycamore schools, for example. I don't know if you're familiar here. And then we'd go to Mexico like every other summer since I was born. And that shift was intense. And then being surrounded by so much family and celebrations, rituals, deep spirituality on the sides of both of my mom and dad's side. So that contrast kind of was sort of an early memory imprinted in my aesthetic and who I was. And then here's an example of two of my professors in school when I went to study art. In fact, I started off as business undecided at Xavier University. I do my own business now, of course, but I was really quite lost. I was, really at that time, my parents' dream was the American dream, to come over here and to get an education and, build yourself up and, have a lot of prosperity through that. But we all, it's interesting, my brothers and sisters became artists, farmers, and therapists. So it was sort of like this funny joke on him, and we all want to go back to Mexico, and they were coming here. And so, no, we have this deep connection and longing. And even though we're not there now, there's a real deep connection to Mexico for all of us. And so I took the plunge, in sort of a crisis point in my undergrad, and was crying and talking to my mom. I was like, I don't think I should be here. I think I need to study art. And the reason that led me to that was at Xavier, I took a teaching job, a student job where I was working with all artists, and it was called Sign Crew. We had to do handmade signs for all the clubs, organizations, and it was a big student fair. I just happened upon this table, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you want to apply? You got to do this drawing and see if you could, it's part of your interview." And so I did a hand drawing, with requisition forms, and they hired me. It was all, I look back at these breadcrumbs and I understand that it was meaningful and sort of put in my path. And so I would work a few days a week with all art majors, and I at one point couldn't believe that people were getting to study this world and immerse themselves in it, and I wasn't one of those people. So I took that plunge, and I went to art school. But I transferred to UC DAM, but I didn't have a portfolio, and I really didn't have the grades at that time. But I used trickery, which was a value of the Maya and Mesoamerican people. And I basically had a form and had professor sign me in the first day of class for an entire year. And I did well in those classes, and I said, "Hey, look, I've gotten all A's here. Can I get into the program now?" So I got it, and that's sort of the trajectory. I studied. Here's an example of, on the left here, Frank Herman, a local artist, was my professor that I got to work under, and really resonated with this language of abstraction. And he was influenced by oceanic art, indigenous art of, Oceania and Polynesia. And his hero, the artist on the right here, is an example of the artist John Walker's work. John Walker is a British painter who also was inspired by Aboriginal art, and he had traveled there several times. He's a British painter, but both of these artists really went back to sort of this archaic, source of how art and why art was made, before colonialism kind of interjected, and it became what we know today, even the Western European framework and history. And so this really piqued my interest. Frank had written letters to his hero, John, for like 10, 15 years, and every year writing letters that you're talking to him about how he's his hero and all this and that. And he came to give a talk and to give an exhibition at UC DAP in my final quarter at DAP. And my professor Frank said, hey, sign up to talk with him and to have a critique, studio visit. And I said, okay, and I did. He invited me to study at BU, Boston University, for graduate school painting. And so I went there, and in my senior year also at DAP, I had the fortune to take a pre-Columbian art history class with Professor Joe Face. It was a special offering. And we were able to study this art history that had to do with Mexico. I just blew my mind, because I've been studying the traditional everything in art school, and so I was deeply fascinated. I wrote for a grant also that summer after I graduated undergrad. Even though I'd gone to Mexico, so much, I hadn't gone to these really deep areas between the border of Mexico, Chiapas, and Guatemala, and I was able to visit the places that I had studied in this class, and that just, changed my whole world, going down there and seeing ritual being performed in Catholic churches, but it was unlike any Catholicism I'd ever seen. There were no pews, and there were shamans or curanderos sitting on the floor of the church, and this is in San Juan de Chamula in Chiapas. There were pine needles, fresh pine needles, covering the entire floor of the church, and there were candles that shaman were putting. There was a shaman curandero and a family sitting with the shaman, and there were offerings of posh, this alcoholic corn drink, and candles, and copal smoke was billowing everywhere in that church. And so it was quite a scene. There was no photography allowed in there, but I was able to go in there, and I never experienced something like that. And there was chanting, and they were all intermixing, all the little groups of families with their shaman. And then there was chickens even being sacrificed there, and prayers, and just people crying and people laughing. And it was really jarring to me. And so I understood that there was more here to what the Catholicism that I had been brought up with. And so I went to Boston University, and I wanted to continue studying more about Mesoamerica, and so I was able to take, this is my book I've had for 20 years now, and no, less than that, maybe 18, 17, but I took a glyphic writing course at Harvard University. I did an independent study there, audited the course with a professor, Fitzsimmons, there. And because that was a hub, actually. Harvard was a hub of Mesoamerican studies. They had the Peabody Museum there. And so I took advantage of learning how this extensive language was created through pictographs. And so I saw, that there was a parallel to the abstract art that I loved and enjoyed. I saw that there was this indigenous art history equivalent here in the Americas that also took imagery from the man-made and natural world and brought it down and simplified into the most salient point to make these pictographs and communicate language and meaning through that. And so this is a piece that I did at Boston University. I had these green overalls, I had these dried fish from the market, and a horseshoe crab. And then on the floor of my studio, I had these drawings of Maya glyphs. And so I just had that image, and I just took a sort of a snapshot of that for this painting as a departure for the painting. Also poetry of our artists, Marion Moore and Elizabeth Bishop, I was trying to connect with the sense of place there in the East Coast. And so I was there in the early 2000s in Boston, which, I think of my students now, and they're in such a good place. It was a really very macho, actually, program, the painting program there. And you could see it palpably in the way that the female and male students were treated, and the state of being of each group. But it was a really challenging time, but it was also a transformative time. We got to paint on the landscape. I'll go back to this painting. We got to paint on the landscape at my professor's house in Maine, from sun up till sundown for like 10 days. We did that a couple times a year. And that completely changed my life as well, because, without any distractions, any kind of responsibilities, your full focus was just to observe the landscape and paint. And I sort of entered this heightened state of perception. I thought, oh my gosh, is this what people talk about when, they meditate, when they, it was really, reality became kind of a little wonky, like the distance between me and the landscape. I mean, there was, the tides coming in, if you are familiar with the East Coast, and there was fog and foxes running and seals swimming and jumping in the ocean. And so that was a really transformative time for me as well. Here's a little bit more about the Maya glyphs. I was interested in who the artist was in this pre-colonial Mexico. Like, it was what I had studied, a culture that was seeped in art at every level, in economics, in farming, in beekeeping, in political realms, in literature. In the Maya specifically, the Mesoamerican, I say Mesoamerica is Middle America. It encompasses Central America and Mexico, and the indigenous world, right? And so the artist was pinnacle to every art was pinnacle, was inserted in every part of language even. And so it's an artist's dream, actually, this world. And so I wanted to know what the role of the artist was in Mesoamerica. And this is the scribe down below. The writer and the artist were one and the same in the ancient world. And, I was reading that the artist created their world through their imagination, as deposited and then written and translated into art. And you could see there's like a little stylus here, and this artist with a headdress and other symbols surrounding. But I just was fascinated by this idea of they were up the upper echelon, all artists of the Mesoamerican world, the ancient Maya world. And I didn't see that at the time. In my own world, I saw struggling artists. I saw, this is going to be tough. My parents were like, what are you doing? You're going into art. And so I was just sort of intrigued by this. And this painting I did of the Maya scribe, this is really silver paint. It's an 8 by 8 foot painting, but it kind of translates as white here. But there's iridescent and silver paint here. But here you see the form of, and I started to paint that scribe, the artist, as a way to connect with that ancient artist. And then I came back to Cincinnati after living in Boston for a year after, and then Vermont at a residency. And this parish priest, I still was kind of, involved. My only community was the Catholic Church, where the Latino immigrant people were. And this parish priest, really young, charismatic guy, was Padre Jorge. He asked me to do something for the Hispanic festival. And I thought, what if I do the floor paintings that we had done growing up, but I instead bring back the indigenous aspect, iconography. I just was like, forget the Catholic. Well, he doesn't, he didn't give me parameters, and I thought, yeah, we can do that. I think I'm going to try that. And in this way, it was like of me merging materials that I'd grown up with and traditions. And as I researched it, the floor paintings were actually quite ancient and predated the Catholic iconography. And they used actually natural materials, flowers and beans. And later, as the Industrial Revolution made its way into Mexico, wood shavings were used to make these floor pieces. But there was this transmutation from the ancient to, Christianity and Catholicism. And then I brought it back in this This was at the Hamilton County Fairgrounds here in Cincinnati. And then I put pine needles. I wanted to bring back that experience I had in that church, so I put fresh pine needles everywhere. My sister donated these ceramic pieces back here, and you can see those little cylinders way off there. And I put copal smoke, and I wanted to have that billowing kind of space of communion with this other realm that I had experienced in that church. And so this is a Quetzalcoatl image, and it was this icon that's both in the Zapotec, Nahuatl. It's sort of all throughout the different groups of indigenous people in Mesoamerica, of this feathered serpent that would come back again at one point to reconcile the atrocities that have happened. So it spoke to me mostly because of the scale of it, and I wanted to have this undulating, but let's see. And then I started to experiment with different poetry that's come to me, like that I would be reading. I would merge with, this is kind of backwards down here, but these are wood shavings that I put up onto the wall. This was a temporary, because it's actually held together with silicone, and then that had to the wall. This was at Semantics Gallery, so it really wasn't sustainable. But I wanted to see that material go up. I wanted it down, but I was a painter, and I was like, how could it go up? And I just wanted that immersion, and I felt like I could see this wall coming towards me of material. And so here's some other pieces that I made. My sister was getting married at this time, and I was just thinking about union and love, and so I was experimenting with these forms, really inspired by that glyphic writing also. And then here's a piece I did about just observing worker bee virtues. I felt like people were really, immersed in this capitalist framework. As my father and my mother were like, this is it, hard work, and pull yourself up from the bootstraps and just, make sure you get insurance and make sure you have a good job. You make sure you have it. So it was just like, oh, okay, yes, I got to do that, right? It just seemed to be like, this kind of, I couldn't reconcile those two things in my art career, because people were like, well, how are you going to sell art? And I was like, wait, this is about something completely different. So I couldn't fit one into the other. I mean, I still kind of struggle with that, but I had a roommate that was tending to bees. I had bees on our property, was cultivating honey, or helping to cultivate honey and care for the bees. And so I was just thinking about what it meant to be a worker. And are people really doing what they want to do, or are they just following in a structure and system that they were inherited and told to? So I did this piece in that same exhibit, the Kennedy Heights Art Center, and I was just, reading this about Esau and Jacob, and just taking biblical stories almost as just oracles, almost like, I think I really had this dream of becoming a mother as well, and so this just felt really great to make this piece. This was about, maybe 9 years before I had children, but they actually look like these two children. My children, I have two children, and so I just thought there was something about the way that I worked in my painting was that I started to attach myself to just being in communion when I was drawing, when I was painting, when I was pigmenting the wood shavings, and really letting the artwork reveal itself to me as I was going, like as this sort of conversation and communion with the self-generating element. And I just love the idea that you can make an artwork and that it reveals itself to you after. It's a message that's trying to be communicated. This was at the Art Academy of Cincinnati, and this was done in 2009. And I was going through a really hard time. I had kind of gone through periods of depression, since I was 18 that I could remember palpably. And so I did, I was living in a capitalist structure. I was interested in this ancient world, but I couldn't really reconcile it within my world. So I was finding safety. I'm an artist, and I'm an educator, and here's where it exists in this box, right? But in this piece, I wrote in ancient Maya glyphs the location of where I was with cardinal directions here in this piece. North, I think it was northeast, and then I wrote the coordinates using numbers. And basically it was like an SOS. I was thinking that if there was a world beyond this one, I'm sending out this message to that world through this artwork for help and guidance, But part of me even didn't believe it. I was like, what am I doing? Well, this is just a concept. But I really, I'm going to put it out there. But, I'm a scientific materialist, right? This exists here in the art world, and I'm over here. And yes, I'm exploring this idea, but from a kind of distance still, And so here you can see another perspective of it. But mostly there was this sort of kind of healing that I felt through the intense color and texture that I was putting down. It was like people often ask me about my color choices, and I just feel that these intense colors provide some kind of medicine for me. I think it goes back to my childhood of those happy memories of building piñatas and floor pieces. And if you've been to Mexico, there's like this intense, it's very earthy and, red dirt and natural beauty. But then the art that you see everywhere, made mostly by indigenous artists in the marketplaces, are these intense foil pieces, intense pink colors, contrasted. And something just feels like, almost like you're taking medicine for me when I put those intense colors together. So in 2019, in 2018, I actually, I had children, and but I had gone through this. I had been without like a period of depression for a while. I got married, and I had children. I had babies, and I was like, worried. Oh my gosh, I've heard of postpartum depression. None of that happened. It was just a beautiful, fruitful time for me. But yes, I ended up having this depression in 2018, and it was really intense. It was more than I had experienced. And after I got out of that, I decided, I've got to figure something out with this. I'd done the traditional Western European therapeutic model, and even pharmacology and those realms, but really none of that was working at this point for me. And so then at that point, when I came out of the depression finally, after 9 months actually in 2018, I went back to indigenous, I started to open myself up to the possibility that these rituals and that these practices that I had experienced and that I had kept safely over here could possibly be useful in my personal life now, in a way that could be real and true. And it was really a shift for me to do that and to think that way. And it was completely transformative. That was the moment where, everything really shifted in my life. There was began this great period of healing. A lot of now what I know is generational trauma that we get inherited, especially through colonialism and my particular background. I could see it all now, and it was this sort of clarity, but also this grace, and so I started to connect with. It was in 2019. I started to connect with online indigenous groups that were practicing healing modalities and writing and ritual, and so I started to intentionally do that for myself, and it was just a beautiful time. And 2020 came, and I know the world was falling apart, but it was like this beautiful time for me of reconnection and deep healing, really true healing for me. And so I wrote for this grant, for the Black and Brown Artist Grant by ArtsWave that came up in 2020. And I decided to make a piece with great intention about responding to, in particular, the killing of George Floyd, and thinking about how the world had to collapse, has to die, a certain iteration, so that a new one can be resurrected. And this was a very Mesoamerican idea, but now it was infused with reality and within a cultural context, contemporary context for me. And so I was really empowered by this. I might give you this other view. And so I did this snake. The snake. I was also going to the Cincinnati Museum Center. There was a Maya exhibit that coincided right with the pandemic. But I was doing a mural in the basement of this museum center, and I asked if I could just go into that show as much as I wanted as part of the agreement of the mural, and they said okay. So I was going every day, and the snake, I kept seeing the snake image, was a symbol in Mesoamerica of death, transformation, and rebirth. So I wanted to make a big one. I thought, I'm going to help usher in this death of our paradigm, because it needs to die, you know. And I was thinking about George Floyd in particular, and I had watched that video, and I thought, you know, this was what I was holding close with the snake. And then inside of the snake, I put a symbol of ancestors right here. There's two, 1 and 2. This means ancestors. These symbols inside. And I thought that while this is going on, I'm helping in my work. My intention is to help usher that death of the current problematic paradigm of our world, help to usher in the transformation and the rebirth, that we could rely on our ancestors to be near us and to guide us and to help us in this process. And then surrounding the snake, I had these hands that were holding a stylus, brown hands holding a stylus. And I thought that as this is happening, that, you know, particularly brown and black people and marginalized folks could, through their imagination, create the new story, the new reality, the new paradigm. And so I created this piece because I was doing this personally as well in my studio, and I was really deeply committed since 2019 to a journal sketchbook practice where I would write as a purging, but as also as the Toltec tradition had this practice of creating, again, through the imagination, and that the artist could create their reality through imagination and through writing, and to writing it or drawing it out. And so I was doing that in personal ways in my studio, and I was finding it was all happening, you know. I'm like, wow, this is very powerful stuff. This is very real. I mean, I couldn't believe it, that if I could just write down what intention I wanted or vision that I had for myself in the future, with coming from a place of authenticity and from the heart, that it was coming true. I mean, I could tell you many stories, but it was just all these great things were happening. And so this piece on top is that hand drawing again, that stylus. It could be a paintbrush, it could be a stylus, it could be a wand, you know. Just, it's a sort of portal of, it's an instrument of translation, is how I see it. And then the bottom glyph here is an actual Maya glyph that means to conjure. And so through your imagination, as translated through whatever tool you have, you could conjure a new reality for yourself individually, but collectively as well. That can happen. And so this became a very important piece for me. It was a ritual object for me, and it held a lot of potency. And I started to see that maybe it could be almost a talisman, almost like, I started to shift the potency of what these objects could be. But here is an example of the two. I had two of these pieces on the left and right hand side at the Freedom Center for the Black and Brown exhibition in 2020, 2021. And Here I had like several paper abstracted hands in the center, done in that piñata style. And then I had this projection of a fire, this idea of, actually it was a new fire ceremony that I had been researching and reading about that's still alive today in many different Mesoamerican cultures around the world, or specifically, I'm sorry, in Mesoamerica, where everything is burned at the end of a calendrical cycle in order to leave behind any kind of problems or generational redundancies that were holding us back in a community or in a family, so that a new cycle could begin. And so I thought that's what I wanted to do with this piece, to kind of, the big snake piece is down below. It's called Coatl, which means snake in Nahuatl, and manifesting hands. So then here's you can see a little bit more of the texture of these pieces from this angle. And so just as a side note, there's 68 distinctive indigenous languages being spoken in Mexico today. Just Mexico. 68 distinct indigenous languages from each other. And I don't think people know that. They're just like, oh, Mexico, Even Mexicans, it's a very weird relationship that they have to their own indigenous people, which everybody's indigenous down there, basically 98%. But it's not quantified like it is here in the United States. But yeah, they'd all qualify. Basically, 98% of Mexicans would. Let's see. So it's a really complex and very varied world. These languages are in danger, and this world is in danger. I'm very happy to be seeing this kind of attention and regeneration. Jeffrey Gibson, an indigenous artist, was at the Venice Biennale, and he was the first indigenous artist to be showcased. And so just think that's such a great sign for this world to be brought back. I think we all have indigenous roots from somewhere. Even in Europe, there was like pre-colonial partnership societies that really had a lot in common with Mesoamerican and indigenous North American communities and people. And so I encourage students to go back to those places, those times. And even if that's an internal meditation or prayer, way of doing that, I encourage that. So here's another view of that. And this is an ephemeral floor piece. So, this was all swept up, ritualistically destroyed at the end. Here is an artist. I went to Mexico in 2022 to this particular indigenous community called Cuentepec in Morelos, Mexico, which is near where my grandmother lives. And I had used a ritual when I'd been there 6 months before by myself. I went to visit my grandmother, and I wrote down, I would please, honorable ancestors, known and unknown, guide me to where I need to be today. I had like a day by myself in Mexico City before I went further south. And I went to this exhibit where these women were featured, these indigenous women artists, right there in Cuentepec and Coyoacan in Mexico City. And I read that this indigenous scholar had written all of this, a beautiful curation of these women artists, but also this little town is the only town in all of Mexico where Nahuatl, the indigenous language, is considered, it is the official language of that town. And so he was beginning this collective indigenous space to preserve this culture. It's called Xinanxcalco. And so I wrote him a letter, and I'm like, I'm going down there, I want to go visit. And I wrote a grant for it, and I went. You can see she has a little boom box, like a ceramic piece there. And so I translated that ceramic piece thinking about how new technologies can help you reconnect with the archaic world. Because the boombox, the radio recorder, was the first object that was brought back when indigenous people would come to the United States seeking work. They would bring those back. And then they would translate those into ceramic, into their ancient practices. And I thought there was something really powerful about that transmutation of material and meaning and the essence of that. Also, that I really reconnected with a lot of these practices through technology, through online sources, right? So that was what the Tepotzanili was about. I did this large floor piece. Those are my two kids, Tenoch and Paloma, and I did this floor piece called, it's called Tepotzanili Live Stream Transmission, and I actually had the perimeter of the Ohio River in the center. I had these hands holding on to iPhones, but then they had down the river, and then they had the monarch butterfly, design, on the iPhone, because, the butterflies, the monarch butterflies, it's kind of a mystery, but they come to all the way through the Midwest and then come back to Mexico. Of course, that was meaningful for me, but they use the natural world too, the river systems, in order to sense and guide them. And so I was thinking of that kind of reverberation, or that we could see technology as a mirror to the natural world. And yes, there are negative aspects, but there are also ways in which, we could help to trickle, to generate and connect and to regenerate archaic and indigenous people's worlds for the better, for the good of all, right? And so, yeah, there's these triangles at the top here, and I used quilt codes from the Underground National Railroad. There's these quilt codes that are, that people think that they might be real, or maybe it's a myth. But I like this idea of these triangles. There's these symbols supposedly that were hung on quilts to communicate messages to people seeking freedom as they were crossing over through the Underground Railroad. And the triangle motif was follow the wild geese home to freedom, north to freedom. And so I had this poem by Mary Oliver called Wild Geese that had been with me for many, many years. And so that was a personal meeting, but it was also connecting to where we were here in Cincinnati. And then here I had images of technology. These little antennae are for my symbol of like artificial intelligence, but then I mixed them with this Nahuatl symbol of art and poetry, these little green and pink pieces. So I infused those in there as a way of alchemizing the two. And here's a little bit about the material that I used. Sophia's familiar with this material. You've helped me mix a lot of the different pigments and colors. This is a little bit of how it was built. And this piece I actually was able to build permanently. Through trial and error, I finally found this wallpaper paste that worked to bind it together. And then this was at the Cincinnati Art Museum. There's like 4 pieces that come together like a puzzle piece, and then there's an ephemeral edge I put around the edge. I just had to try it, but it's, I like the ephemerality, but I also like the idea of, letting these travel a little bit and putting an ephemeral edge. Okay, and so this was one of my latest projects, Tlacuapatia, that I did last spring at the Welcome Project, part of Wave Pool's Contemporary Art Center. I had a residency there. And this we see Maria Sabina, who's, I dedicated this to, this project to indigenous healers who have maintained their practices despite 500 years plus of suppression, vilification, prosecution. They've kept it alive. And Maria Sabina is one of the famous ones that we see, if you're familiar with her. And she had a lot of poetry, and there's been writings about her. Look her up. She's really interesting. And so I wrote one of her poems on the walls of this space. And these blue large panels were inspired by a spiritual experience that I had through ritual. And I don't think you can read that at all, but I also tried something new here, a healing. I wanted to invite the public to do ritual along with me, personal ritual that I had done. I started to see how I could make artwork where people could come into the exhibition and build an artwork through collective ritual. And so this was the healing table at the Welcome Project. And then down below, that next one's at the Westin. I brought it to the Westin afterwards. But this was inspired by a ritual of Tlaquiquilia, and that's a Nahuatl ritual where you take corn or wood shavings, amazingly even, and you put it on the body of an ailing person. And through prayers and intention, the ailment is drawn from the body into the material, and then the material is taken off and destroyed. And so I had done this in my own iteration with writing and material and burning. And so I thought, I gave everybody instructions on the healing table to invite people to write down their intention for healing of a physical, mental, emotional ailment. Put it on of yourself or someone you love or a greater group of people. Put it onto the table and put material onto it. You could create a design. You could use corn. I had corn, different color material. So this table got built up with everybody's intentions, and so that was new. And I felt an enormous responsibility for this, but. Felt it was really meaningful for people, and I just so I brought this to the Westin Art Gallery, and then I had this at the Welcome Project, these figures. I was imagining that as you're creating this, as you're putting down your intention and you're doing this ritual, that all of your ancestors are coming to the table from beyond, on the other side of this dark space, that unknown space. That's what the sort of black walls represented in that exhibit. And they're coming up to the table to meet you and to help you with this. Okay. And so let's see. This is, then I took it to my studio, the contents of that. Oh, here it is. Nope. The contents of the table offerings. That's my daughter. And I used copal smoke. My sister made this copal burner, my sister Veronica. And then, and so, with prayers and just thinking about all of those ancestors, sort of, I'm just the conduit here, like, hey, everybody come in right now, and mine too, and really consider these petitions from your loved ones, and the copal smoke is very important to Mesoamerica. Like, the ancestors love that smell. It helps to bring them right here and say, oh, okay, we're here. My son helped me build the fire, and then we destroyed the contents of the table. So yeah, this is another piece that I did in that show, and this is called DNA. DNA strand, the DNA strand. Breaking generational trauma. So I did this sort of DNA strand all along the perimeter of the gallery, and I put messages underneath it. But as I was doing it, I had my personal intentions of what I want to break in my family, so that I don't pass that down to my children. Thinking about relationships between my parents and my aunts and my grandparents, and I did that with intention with this piece, and then also ritualistically destroyed it. As a way to usher those desires, those petitions, those intentions forward. Let's see that. And here's some other views from the Westin Art Gallery. And last fall, I had a solo show there that was called Ritual of Imagination and Reconnection. And then final, this is the latest piece I've done here that's completed in the studio, and it's called Codex Alchemy, and I'm basically twisting and pulling words, I have a specific intention for this one, for a piece that I'm doing for a land returns project that I've been working on, that I started at residencies last summer. So that's basically it for today. This is my Instagram if anybody wants to follow, or the land returns project will be upcoming this fall and then next year, and it's about supporting indigenous groups locally in Colorado and New York, and locally to rematriate land back to the original stewards of the land. And so my experience of the land, and so those are the pieces that I'm working on right now. But I think we're at time, right? Thank you, guys.